On a second edition of Chatterbox Live. I'm joined this morning by Mr. Greg Whitby, who is the Executive Director of Catholic Education in the Diocese of Parramatta. This is a great opportunity for you to have your voice heard as a student. We'll also be taking a few questions from our live audience here at Holy Family Primary in Emerton. Thank you, Mr. Whitby, for taking the time to join in today's discussion with our school.
Oh, thank you very much. It's me who should be thankful because I've interrupted your learning time. But as I said to you earlier, I think it's really important that we take the time and stop and just listen. Listen to the voices of the boys and girls who are in our schools, because our job is to make sure that you are happy at school, that you learn something that's useful, because we want you to be able to really enjoy your life and contribute to our fabulous country here in Australia.
Thank you, Mr. Whitby. The first question for today's discussion comes from a student who wants to know, is school the be-all and end-all?
That's, again, a very good question. I don't think the school is the be-all and end-all. Living your life is the most important thing, and learning is just a part of that. Sometimes we can get too consumed by school and too consumed by the outcomes, but our purpose is to make sure that we have, students who can contribute into the society in which they work, and that means that they need to have a life outside of school, and that's as important as anything. In your journey now, you're in sort of the primary years of school, go on into secondary, you'll have options, and I hope that into the future we'll be able to provide options that you might be able to actually leave school and come back to school because you might not ready to do things, or you might want to have different experiences. So I don't think it's the be-all and end-all. It's just an important part of equipping you to be good participants in our society.
So our next question is from a student who is curious as to whether we should have more time for outdoor activities.
Yes, I think we need more time. It's a balance, isn't it? I certainly know when your teachers have got to work out, how they teach the things that we're required to teach. Sometimes it can get very busy and it can get very pressed, and that might take precedent. But we know now very much that it's about the wellness and well-being. So like I said before, we want you to be happy and healthy. So as much as we can get outdoors, I think, is so important. We're lucky in a country like Australia because of our weather. We can spend a lot of time outdoors, and our health and well-being, our fitness and well-being are vitally important to your learning. So I'd support as much work, much activities outside. And you've seen here, the developments here, what we're putting into the play area for you so that you can utilise them to do the sorts of things that you do to relax and enjoy yourself.
Good point, Mr. Whitby.
Thank you.
Our next question is from a quad in our live audience who wants to know more about school uniforms.
Hello, Mr. Whitby.
Right. How are you, a quad?
My question is, should we wear uniforms and why?
That's a very very important question. I think what uniforms do, it makes it easier for everybody, and you don't get into the competition of clothing and all those sorts of things. I think it's just a very practical thing. However, I think sometimes we go overboard with uniforms. I'd like to keep it as simple, and I'd like to keep the cost down. It's very expensive clothing, so shorts and trousers and skirts and just a simple top, I think, are important. The school and how it operates has a community presence too, and I think it does a lot for the community when they know and they can recognise students from that school, and it helps build the reputation of the school. And I think that's important as well. But I think there's far too much emphasis sometimes placed on uniforms, and the high cost of clothing makes it just sensible that everybody has access to a very simple uniform that gives an identity to the schools? It's a very, very good question, and most schools that I know seem to have a uniform in some sort. Those that don't, you could even say they have a uniform because their uniform is not a uniform, and they're totally different. But even then, they tend to be dressed the same.
This next question is a unique one and comes from a student who would like to know if they can have a pet day at school. At the risk of making your teachers' lives difficult, yes. I mean, and actually, I can't direct that. I can't make it mandatory. I go back to what we said before, and about school being the be all and end all. You have life and interests outside, and I think it'd be wonderful to bring a pet, but that's a decision for the school. It's easy for me to say, yes, have a pet day, but you might have a range of other things that are important here at Emerton. So that's a decision I think made at the local level. I do know of schools that do have pet days, and I know of particularly with our bishop, who is a Franciscan Franciscan priest, who was founded by St Francis of Assisi, who was the one who actually said, the animal kingdom was so important as a patron saint of animals. So schools that sometimes have the name St Francis have a pet day, and they even get the priest to come in and bless the pets. So, I please, Mr. Principal, I'm not make it mandatory, but I think it'd be a good idea. Who's got a pet that they'd like to bring? Wow. Thank you very much. I once worked in a school where they had a pet day, and it was the only time I wanted to have a pet day was that one experience. Somebody brought in 2 snakes, and that was it. I couldn't do that. I couldn't go there. Thank you, Mr. Whitby. Next, a student would like to know if we should have school on the weekends so that we can have longer holidays.
Well, you ask all the difficult questions. It's difficult to organise to getting all the students and all the teachers into one place, and I think there's a reality about the week and the work and then the weekend and parents are not working, all those sorts of things. I think the bigger issue in this is about the nature of learning. Increasingly we find that we understand learning happens outside the classroom as well as inside the classroom. And we certainly know that schools now are connected and online and working at different times. And we have schools that offer classes even for students in the holiday, in the school time. Again, as I said earlier, I think into the future we're going to have to look at all that as the changing nature of work and how people work and the nature of the jobs are going to force us to rethink how we do those sorts of things. In the short term, I think we're going to have school terms and then weekends, but I think we're moving to something different, into the future. But the issue is how you want to learn and when you want to learn. The idea of sort of coming to school for, say, 5 weeks and including 7 days a week, and therefore I can have another 5 weeks holiday, I don't think that doesn't do anything, it just changes the arrangement. What needs to change is the fact that you're engaged in lifelong learning continuously, and you can come and get it where you want it and how you want it.
Thank you, Mr. Whitby. Our next question is from Naomi in our student audience at Holy Family Emerton.
Well, these questions I don't know. Hello, how are you, Naomi?
Good, you?
I'm well.
My question is, should we have more awards for students?
More?
Awards for students.
Or awards?
Yes.
Well, I don't know that there's a yes or no answer to that. As I said, this is an issue for the school community. We want to recognise, achievement. And I'm not very keen on competition as a way of forcing kids to learn. And there are many ways you can demonstrate learning outside of just doing a test or being the best at. So I think what schools do, and I think our schools do this well, is recognise performance across the whole dimension of the life that you live. So, you know, in music, I know you're doing music programs, there'll be talented music and there'll be time to recognise those. In the sport domain, in the academic domain. If you focus on the awards, you lose the fundamental purpose and don't recognise the giftedness of each child. And that's what I think is important. And I think by and large schools do that very well. I always think it's an interesting thing, and when I was at school, we used to have these swimming carnivals, or athletics carnivals, or even worse, where they would say we needed to have the carnivals because we need to find out the best runner. Well, you didn't need the carnival. Everybody in the school knew who the best runner was, but we all had to go through this process. You know, and I was always up the end, finishing last, so I didn't like it. But you know, that person got the. Well, we could have done it without all that. But I think it's an important discussion.
So here we have a student who would like to know, why are students punished for bad behaviour?
Can I go home? This is a really grilling. One of the things I really dislike, I don't like the fact that in a lot of schools, not in this one, a lot of schools, they don't like failure. Like if you don't pass the exams, or if you don't do this, you know, and comply with this, you know, you've got this idea of failure. Failure is how you learn. Failure is good. The only problem with failure is if you don't learn something from it. So you try something, it doesn't work, tried your best, it doesn't work, so you've got to try and do something else. Using it as a punishment, as a way of forcing people to learn, doesn't work. You'll learn when you feel safe, when you feel comfortable, when you know that you can try things. Now, having said all that, schools have to have ways of organising themselves, and I'm not sure here, but I certainly can say all of our schools spend time talking about, let's talk about the school rules. Do you do that? Yeah. You have school rules. I know you do, because I've walked down the path and you've got them on the pathway. So you know what's expected here, and if people don't do that right thing, well, obviously we have to do something about it. Now, calling it punishment, when I went to school, we used to have things like the cane. Well, those sorts of things as punishment don't happen today, thank goodness. But when you use the word punishment, I think there needs to be appropriate action taken if people do transgress or don't do the right thing. So punishment as using to drive changing behaviour is not good, and engagement in what you do and what you should do is a better way of doing it.
Thank you, Mr. Whitby. This next student would like to know if we should have more of a focus on creative arts.
Definitely. Again, I can only reiterate what I said before. It's not just a matter about learning subjects, learning about maths and being able to read and write. They are critical. But the full breadth of your personality and your growth, you need to have exposure to that. And you've got your orchestra starting. We should have opportunities for drama and those sorts of presentations. We do a lot in the Parramatta Diocese through our Captivate program, so that we can encourage anybody who has that creativity and wants to express themselves. So the more we can do, the better.
So this question comes in from a student who has asked whether or not we should group classes by intelligence and academic performance.
Oh, wow. No, we should not. We should not do that. We have a thing we call a principle that we operate here in all our schools in Parramatta. Diversity is the norm. Everybody's different. and we focus on each child, not the class, not those who we might say are special, not those we might say are difficult. Everybody is unique, everybody is gifted, and that's how we approach it. Streaming and classes for whatever, my experience is they don't make the difference. You have good teachers teaching you, and they start with you as an individual, and we work from there collectively, and then the school will organise it in those sorts of ways.
So this next question is from a student who asked, why aren't there more male teachers in primary schools?
Oh. An honest story, I started my teaching in a primary school in 1974, a long time ago. So I taught in a primary school for 2 years, and at the end of that second year I thought, I've got to stop this or I will not last as a teacher. It was so demanding. Primary teaching is, and all teaching is demanding, and I had some friends and I moved into secondary teaching because they used to have time off during the day. And anyway, I did like teaching, don't get me wrong, I did it for the right reason, I think. But I don't know the answer to that. You know, you can come up with a whole range of ideas, but I think certainly there is a perception still that, you know, somehow primary schools about child minding. But we have some great male teachers in our schools. We need more of them. It's probably better to ask them rather than me. But in a general sense, sometimes people think, oh, you know, well, it's primary. Well, it's much more rigorous when you move into secondary. But I think those sort of things are just sort of simplistic answers to it. It's a very rewarding career, as all your teachers would know. But we'd like a balance, just like like we've got boys and girls in our schools. We'd just like a balance. So we'd like to encourage more. But I really don't know the answer.
The next question comes from a student at Holy Family Emerton who would like to know more about homework. Welcome, Susan.
Susan. All right. Morning, Mr. Whitby. Good morning, Susan. You have a lovely name. I'm married to a lady named Susan, and I have a sister. I have a sister named Susan. Don't you like the name? Okay.
My question is, should students complete homework?
Should they complete homework? Yes, I'm supporting the teachers. Yes is the simple answer. It's work set for you to help you, do better at schooling. I'm not a big fan of traditional amounts of homework. I think that we need to look at, as I said before, about this lifelong learning and working out when you want to learn and how you want to learn and the things you want to learn might provide a range of opportunities that you might want to do other things in your time. But your teachers are working at your learning program, and they'll make determinations of what things you might need to do out of that regular school hour time. If you call that homework, well, that's fine. It's only there to help you. Sometimes, it can be given, and if it's not linked to what you're learning, you might wonder why you need to do all this extra work. Is that what you're saying, Susan? Yeah. But your teachers wouldn't do that, would they? No. Thank you. That's a good question.
Our next question is a common one and is from a student who would like to know if we should have more technology in the classroom, and if so, why?
That's the world out there. You should have, the experience in school should be the same as you have in your normal life. We're very proud of our technology in the Parramatta Diocese, putting it into schools. It's such a powerful tool, and it's only a tool. It doesn't change anything. What changes things is good teachers teaching you and then knowing how to use those tools. So that's why we want to put more technology in the schools, and we want you to use the technology because as the technology gets even more advanced, you're going to have to learn how to deal with all the issues that arise when you put technology in as we're connecting more people. So I think it's critical that we have more in schools, and it's just remember, it's only a tool. The power is not in that Well, I don't have it in my pocket. The power's not in the phone. The power's in the teacher who knows how to use that phone or that connector or that computer or whatever.
Here is an interesting question from a student who wants to know, how long have you been the big boss?
Never, no. I've been the Executive Director of Schools in the Parramatta Diocese for the last 13 years. It's just gone by, and before that I was the Executive Director in the Diocese of Wollongong. So 20 years. That's why my hair looks the way I do and I look ragged. So for 20 years, but it has been the best job, the best work I've ever done. I thoroughly enjoy it.
The next question is from a student who asked whether we should be able to wear any shoes that we want or no shoes at all.
Well, the first part is part of the uniform thing, but I wrote a piece in, I do some writing for the local newspapers, and it was about wearing shoes. There are countries, say New Zealand for example, where the students don't wear shoes, and there's some research to say that taking your shoes off and feeling the carpet enhances your learning. If it works for you, fine. If the school has some rules about uniform, you comply with the uniform and the shoes, and obviously you wear appropriate footwear when you need to be out and doing those sort of things. But if it works, take your shoes off. In my office, I have to go looking for my shoes because I take my shoes off all the time. I don't know whether it helps my thinking, but I just enjoy it.
So our next question, our last question, is about well-being and comes from Josh in our live audience.
Josh. Hi Josh, how are you?
Good. My question is, how can we further prevent bullying in our schools?
How can we
Further prevent bullying in our schools?
Oh, that is, it's a great last question, but the answer to it is going back to the discussion we had before about establishing the norms and the values that you have and making everybody responsible for living it out. It's not the teacher's responsibility, they have a part to play, but it's your responsibility. It's everybody's responsibility, and to name it when they see it. And there's nothing wrong in going and telling a responsible person that this is happening. It's when we hide it or ignore it, and it becomes very, very difficult. I just wish it didn't happen, but I certainly know it's one of the big issues we're dealing with well-being. And we ask for our schools to be transparent, to be clear on the values, to be clear on the outcomes of what happens if those sorts of things aren't respected. I'm sure bullying happens all the time, every day in a whole range of schools, but I'm confident that our schools are trying to deal with it. And if you have ideas of how to deal with it, we'd certainly like to know, because it goes back to our central thing is diversity is norm, everybody is unique, and everybody is a gift from God. So we treat everybody the same.
Thank you, Mr. Whitby, and thank you, Josh. Well, unfortunately, that's all we have time for. Thank you all for submitting your questions and being part of today's discussion. We hope that this has been a good opportunity to increase student voice in the diocese. I'll hand back over to Mr. Whitby now to sum up today's event.
Look, I'd just like to sum up today's events very, very quickly. On Monday, I was at a forum run by the Sydney Morning Herald in Sydney, 500 academics and teachers, and we had the ministers for education and all the people responsible for education in this state and Australia-wide. The importance of these events for me is I can go and talk to these people and say, this is what the boys and girls are saying. The things that you asked today are the big issues. The nature of the learning, where homework fits in it, technology, well-being, and it becomes authentic. That's why I think it's so critical. I love hearing the voices. If you ever have any ideas, your principal knows how to email me and say, you need to think about this. I'd really welcome it. So I think it's been wonderful. I hope you've enjoyed it. I certainly haven't had any easy questions that I could just say, that one is a simple answer. So I'm very genuine about it, and we'll continue to do We have several more of these planned for the rest of the year. So I'd like to thank all the participating schools that are out there in cyberspace for being part of our second edition of Chatterbox, and we're continuing these events into second term. I know we weren't able to get to all the questions, but again I just reiterate, if you want to take the time to send me an email or write me a letter, I'm very happy to respond. I want to thank the staff and the school for interrupting their day, and what a talent here. Eh? Congratulations. Have you got a career in the media now?
Not yet.
No, you don't want a career in the media?
Maybe later on.
Maybe later on, yeah. Okay, I think finishing primary school first is a good start.
Yeah.
So you've been fantastic, and thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you all very much.